Today, we are going to attempt to create a product, an application for our phone called On Vinyl. Now, On Vinyl is a simple application that allows me, is a vinyl collector. Don't think I've got thousands of these vinyls at home, I don't, but I do collect vinyls and I love vinyls, the sound of them. It sounds different to a CD. I've got hundreds and hundreds of CDs, I've been buying CDs all my life. And the biggest problem I've got is I've started buying vinyl. Now, I don't say, oh, I've got that on CD, so I'll not buy it on vinyl. And I'm not trying to replace my CD collection with vinyl. But saying that, if I go to a shop and I find a vinyl, quite often I'll often think, have I got that vinyl? And I think, well, I don't know if I've got it on vinyl or CD. So, first of all, I don't know if I've got it, but I might have. But do I have it on vinyl or do I have it on CD? So I think, you know what, I may well have that on CD, but I might have it on vinyl, but if I've not, I'd want it. So I put together a very simple app that we saw a demonstration of a bit of it yesterday, where I can go to a shop with my phone, scan the barcode of that said vinyl, and it'll come back and say, do I have it or not? I'm purely interested in, have I got it? Should I spend my hard-earned money buying a vinyl that I may have? And I have done that in the past. I've got duplicate vinyls, and then you think, okay. But obviously, if I haven't got it, it'd be nice if it told me about it as well. So then I want to query the internet. And the easiest way to query the internet, I'm sure the vast majority of you use Google. If not everybody in the room uses Google today. So I tend to use Google. And normally you'd start typing in the album cover name or what have you. But you can, into Google, put the barcode. The chances are it will find it for you. And then on my phone, because I've just been told by my phone, you know what, you don't have that. So, okay, before I put my phone away and go pick the vinyl up and go and purchase it with my said credit card, I then press the button on the phone that says, I've bought this, I'm going to buy it. So that then tells the phone to update my database on my Azure server with the information it's just found off Google that I've bought the album. Okay? So when I go to the next shop and I find it again, because I've got really bad memory, I'll do it again and it'll come back and say I've got it that time. The other thing the searching does, sometimes it brings the price back. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. A lot of the times it'll bring the price back. We could enhance this and say, when the Google search has done its business, bring back the top 3 or 5 hits that it found and compare the price. So if on the phone it's saying $19.99 and you pick it up and it says, for example, for this one that I bought last weekend, $36.99, you may think, do you know what, I'm going to put that back on the shelf. I want it, but I'm going to go to this shop and buy it. So enhancements to the app could be click that button and do an Amazon online click once purchase of it, because they all have APIs that you can call into. We're not doing that today. We're just saying, you know, I'm going to get it from the shop. So that's the simple app that we're going to, hopefully, write today from start to finish. It's very simple UI. It's going to ask for a barcode. We may be able to get the barcode scanning by the phone automatically as well. As I said, it's going to search a cloud-based remote database. Cloud as in it's going to be on a Windows Azure server that I showed you briefly yesterday. And obviously we'll show the results on the phone. Before we get anywhere near the phone, we're really going to start off with a repository. We're going to create the server routines. We're going to create a desktop application to allow us to see this data. We're going to move the logic onto the server and the data onto the server. And then we're going to get the layers of client libraries that we need to create. So, as I said, blank canvas, completely. Define the repository structure. Well, I've created the repository. It's got a single structure and it's got 5 fields on it. That's all we need. We're going to use CodeGen to build data objects. We've talked a lot about data objects. We're going to use CodeGen to build field mapping and table mapping. Again, all code generated for the Harmony components. We're going to customize the code because we can't define images in the repository, okay? So we're going to customize our code-generated stuff in a way that we can carry on code-generating them. We won't break that process, but we'll be able to extend it and include image information. On the server, we need the data objects Now the data objects are going to expose our synergy structures, the fields within our synergy structures, as properties of a class. Now those are all going to be alphas, decimals, integers, implied decimals, whatever types they are, synergy types. And we're going to have to expose those on the Android side as .NET types. The Android side really needs to understand .NET types, not synergy types. You can use synergy types, but if you start talking to the Xamarin Forms stuff for the UI, it gets a bit confusing. The converters are all built into Symfony, so we don't need to worry about how we convert it, we just know that we can convert it. And we're going to go through the code at various levels. Data objects have built-in validation, so if we say a field in the repository is required, the data object has properties on it to say, do you know what, I've been modified and I'm not valid. So at any point in time you can interrogate a data object to say, are you valid? And if it comes back as no, then you would, for example, disable the save button on your desktop application. If that value is true, yes I am valid, then you can enable the save button and they can save it. So you don't need to do logic in your program to say, well, have they entered the barcode, have they entered description, have they entered the artist? Okay? The data object does all that for you. So we can use that isDataValid property. Inside the data object as well, there's properties and methods that allow us to say, whatever UI is in front of this data object, and remember inside the data object we don't know what UI we are, then there's properties and events and methods that allow us to say, if anybody's listening out there, if any UI is listening out there, would you please make me the focused control, or whatever control is data bound to me as a property. So for example, if I want to say, there's three fields, there's the barcode, the artist and the title. If they click the new button, I want to create a new one, you obviously want to put focus in the barcode field. So I want to tell the data object, put focus in the barcode field. Data object doesn't know anything about the user interface, but it will raise various events and signals that say, if there's a user interface listening, will you make the control that's data bound to me have focus please? And then it's up to the UI designer, the UI developer to say, do you know what, something's asking for this control here that I've got data bound to this field to have focus. Well, okay, then I'll honour that. But that's not the data object saying this field on this form gets focus. That's the data object saying, can I have focus? It's the UI designer, the UI developer that controls that. And it's exactly the same for enable-disabled data. If you, for example, select a record, and I'm going to talk a lot about similarities back to Toolkit. In Toolkit, you have the same I want focus type of stuff with an I next. It's exactly the same concept. Enable disabling data. So you bring a form up and you're in amend mode. Well, if you're in amend mode, the one thing you do not allow them to do is amend the primary key. The primary key in my example is my barcode, because that would be completely changing the whole structure of the record. So you don't allow a maintenance or changes to the primary key field. So you want to disable it or make it read-only. Again, the data object has properties and methods and events in there that say this data cannot be changed. And it's up to then the UI designer over here. I tend to do this. You guys are the dirty data, and you guys are the lovely clean UI, because there's more of you. So the UI over here will honour those, or doesn't necessarily have to, but you'd like to think they'll honour the, do you know what, please don't allow them to change me request from the data. It's up to these guys. If they ignore that, then there's nothing you can do about it. You've made the request, but you don't know them and they don't know you, okay? And that's what the sort of the model view model type design pattern gives you, and data objects fit nicely into that whole design pattern. There's two ways of getting at data. The first one, which we'll see early on, which is on our sort of desktop, is the File.io class. I talked briefly about this the other day. It's a Symfony framework class that you can use to open a file and read and write records to. I would imagine you've all got at least one or a set of subroutines that xcall open my file, xcall read a record, xcall write a record, xcall update a record. Or you've got an xcall IO operation d_open, xcall IO operation _read a record. Okay? Generally, you don't use raw reads and writes. The File.io class is just an extension of that. It's just a modern OO way of doing exactly what you've got today. So no, I'm not saying throw all your I/O stuff that you've had working for donkey's years away and use file I/O class. But if you wanted to move to Synergy.net and you wanted a thread-safe way of accessing data, then you might want to think of the file I/O class. Thread-safe is very important these days. If you think of a program and you're going to load in 10,000 records and you're going to put them in a list, it could take a second, it could take 5 seconds, it could take 10 seconds. If it takes a significant amount of time, 5 or 10 seconds, and the user tries to think, oh, you know what, I want to do other things, I'll minimize that, or I'll move it out of the way, and when they go, and your title changes to bracket not responding bracket, or parentheses not responding parentheses, the user really doesn't have a warm, fuzzy feeling about your application. What do you mean it's not responding? Is it doing anything? Kill it. Task manager, die, go away. That's not the type of experience you want. And the reason it's saying it's not responding, even though it's working away, is because on the user interface thread, you're doing all the loading. You're doing all the work. So the user interface can't respond to that drag the window away. It can't respond to the minimize, because that has to happen on the UI thread, because that's the user interface. So what you tend to do is create a new thread, put your logic that says read a record, put it into this collection, read a record, put it into this collection on a different thread, which means your UI thread sat there doing nothing. So they can drag your window around, they get no response. Still takes the same 10 seconds to load the data, but you can still move the application around. It's not responding. Might not look like it's doing anything, but it's not responding. But if you're updating something that is connected to the user interface over there, and you're updating it over here on this thread, when you say, oh, CUI user interface, here's some data to display, you're on this thread. The user interface is on this thread. Well, it doesn't work, because that event's been raised on that thread. So the UI essentially ignores it. So what this thread-safe stuff inside Symfony does is say, oh, you've loaded something from a file object, and you're putting it in a collection, therefore, what I need to do is go over here to the UI thread and say, CUI guys, there's a request for you to update something. And that'll go, right, I'll get the data, put it on the screen. Again, I can still carry on dragging, and then processing carries on this thread. Okay? And you carry on loading your records, and you can chunk these sort of things up. So this thread-safe stuff allows that to all happen nicely under the hood without you worrying about it. The UI thread, it's the same for non-UI threads. If you open a channel on this thread, it's very dangerous to reference it on another thread. Extremely dangerous, because you get thread sort of collisions and all that kind of stuff, which you want to avoid. So the file I/O, irrespective of which thread you actually access the object, it'll always go back onto the thread that the channel was opened. Okay? So it's a way of protecting you in a multi-threaded environment. These file I/Os accept and return data objects. So if you want to read some data from a file, you set the key values in the data object, the fields, the segments, pass a data object into the file I/O class, it'll extract that, use that as the key, read the record, put it all into the data object and return it. And that's where the dynamic key generation comes in. You don't say, here's a data object and here's the key I want. The key value is inside the data object that you pass it. And you can optionally give it key numbers, but it defaults to the primary key. And we also provide this ability for optimistic locking. When it reads a record and your file's in update mode, it'll immediately unlock that record, but the GRFA, not the RFA, the GRFA will get stored into that data object. So at some point in time in the future, if you change some values and throw that data object into a update method of the file I/O, what will happen is the file I/O will grab the GRA out of that data object, go and read the record using the RFA of it, then compare the records using the G of the GRFA, and if they're the same, it'll take your data and update it. If not, it'll throw an exception to say, somebody's changed this data, you can't update it. So that's the concept of optimistic locking, all built into the file I/O. On the server then, for the Harmony stuff, Harmony does things a little bit different. Harmony allows you to do SQL-style processing of data. So you don't say you want to read a record, you select records. You don't say you want to write a record to a file, you update data in a file. And to do that, Symfony needs a couple of things. It needs a data field mapping, So it can map that field name to this start, length and type inside the record area. Because remember, a record area is just a stream of bytes in Synergy, nothing more, nothing less. We have no concept as such of fields. The field that you see in your program is just an external representation of what the compiler knows as a start value, a length, and how you want to represent it, the type. That's all it does. And it does that so that we can say, do you know what, today I want to see those first 10 bytes as an alpha. Tomorrow I want to see those first 10 bytes as a decimal. Tomorrow I want to see the first 4 bytes of those as an integer. We allow you to do that. Some would argue that we shouldn't, because looking at that first 4 bytes as an integer and had A, B, C, D in it would give you a really bad value. But we still allow you to do it. The way I think of it is Synergy is typeless. We don't have a type. We have a stream of bytes that we can represent as what we consider as types. An alpha, a decimal, an implied decimal, an integer. So what the data mapper does is say, give me the field name and I'll work out what you mean is that bit of the record area for that amount of length, and you want me to represent it as an alpha, a decimal, or an integer. We also have another mapper in there called a table mapper. Because if you look at the example below, the run data select, I'm saying select artist title image URL from vinyl details. So vinyl details at the bottom, that's our table. So the table mapper routine says, and we'll look at the code later, if somebody says vinyl details, what that means is, I want you to open the file, c:/my data/ onvinyldetails.ism. Okay? And we'll see that code and how we set that up in the repository in a few minutes' time. Because we're using query syntax, we can do a where clause, just exactly the same way as the SQL connection works. We have these positional parameters, so you've got the :1, and then you can inject at runtime the value you want to do. You could put in quotes the barcode, so you could say barcode equals quote 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 quote, and that would work. But that means you're string building all the time, every time you want to do a query. So it's better to not do that. It's better to use the positional arguments. We will create more server components as we go through this process of the day. Okay, there's more stuff in there, but the basic components that we're going to create will allow us to query data and manage data.